back to us.
and those in the room who, if I'm wrong or you know better than me, I'm pretty sure that the province gets 40% right off the top, and then the remaining amount is split between the town and the contractor. I don't think I can say the contractor amount in public because it's a contract, right? But we split the remaining 60%. So right off the top, 40% goes to the province.
And then our amount goes into the photo radar reserve.
Reserve, correct.
And that's used only for safety related.
That's right.
And there's a variety of ways that can be done. Plus the an RCMP.
An RCMP officer, and we do have a scholarship fund that we give out in the high school, and then much of it is capital projects related to road, sidewalk, pedestrian safety. I just this morning when I rode my bike to work and parked it in the back of the Civic Center, there's covered parking. There's a big sign on it that says it's funded by Photo Radar. Those types of things, transportation related. Yeah. Go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Okay. Go ahead. The province takes 53%.
53.
Because they did that full review and then increased the amount that they took, and then
40% is maybe what they used to take. Yeah,
And
it's
that's-
changed. So
And that's on every ticket issued, though. It doesn't matter if it's photo radar, right?
every provincial ticket.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so like, yeah.
And then part of that used to go to the Victims of Crime Fund, but now that's being usurped and diverted now. Like, we had one of the best victims of crime models in the country, heralded, and now that money is being usurped and being put into general revenues. It's been increased and then being put into general revenues. And victims of, or the Valley Victim Services and victim services organizations like them across the province now have to come cap in hand looking for their base operational funding. And money's going into policing in rural communities, basically.
Thank you. Mr. Irwin.
And that provincial portion never shows up on our books. We book the revenue net of that number.
Right,
So
okay.
if you really want to see what photo radar was, it's higher than that. So.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Councilor Bear.
There was a surprising number of wildlife issues with dogwood trees, which I think is fairly newish. Is that something that would fit into reducing human-wildlife attractants and interactions? And are we looking at adding that tree to maybe our not recommended list?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. This year was definitely a bit of an anomaly. And even just a couple of years ago, do you remember there was it Mountain Ash that like the berries went crazy sort of all of a sudden randomly on Mountain Ash, right? And then we were scrambling to add that. So usually what we have done in the past couple of years is assigned one officer, and it's part of their portfolio to actually do patrols around town. We get a lot of residents who call things in or where there's problem areas to go, and they work very closely with representatives from the province who are tracking where we're having attractant issues. So that conversation may or may not have happened yet, and it also may be a blip for the 1 year because it was such a dry year. But it is something that we work and talk with the province about as a go forward.
I have a concern that the province isn't just relocating these black bears. They're taking them out of town and killing them. And that happened this year, and they didn't publicly announce it. They said that they had relocated this mother bear and 2 cubs, and then later it came out that they in fact had been destroyed by wildlife officials. Do we track how many bears are taken and actually relocated?
We do not. That's a complete provincial responsibility. That would be something if council was interested in for council to advocate with the province to. We're not involved in that in any way.
That would be something I'd like to know in terms of information for a decision on whether or not we would be interested in perhaps going further and regulating these types of trees. I know, like, and Banff dances around it, we dance around it, should we, shouldn't we, crabapple trees, Shepherdea, all of it, but if the end result is that what's actually is happening is that these animals are being destroyed, I think that affects a decision that we could make as council. So if that was information we could get from the province, I would like it.
Sure. I don't know that we get that level of detail as a matter of course, so I would encourage you to work with your council colleagues to bring that forward as a motion so that we have council direction on it. I don't think the current relationship we have or the way that program works between bylaw and the province would naturally give us that. So if you want something more, we would need to have a motion of council, unless somebody has a different thought than that.
Well, I was just going to add that these conversations have often been held at the Human-Wildlife Coexistence Roundtable, where provincial representatives are present, as are Banff National Park. You know, as we know that it's a borderless habitat and corridor for bears and other carnivores and animals. So, you know, whether they're being attracted to these kinds of attractants in Canmore or the MD of Bighorn or the town of Banff, and we need to work together as a valley, because for the success of that kind of a program, we all need to participate. So we have a meeting at the end of the month of the roundtable. Mayor Krausert and I will attend, and we can certainly raise those kinds of questions there, yeah.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, this is warning in advance, we're gonna do a deep dive into fire. So stop me at any time as you have questions.
Excuse me? We're doing a deep dive into fire?
We're doing
I
deep
was taught that's wrong.
Today it's right.
Okay.
So the Fire Rescue Department is on page 32 in your binder. It's funded in a very tiny, tiny way from service agreement, but mostly from taxes. Yeah, go ahead.
May I go back for 1 second?
Yeah.
The photo radar contract is up when exactly?
In 2022, I don't know when exactly, but we'll need to RFP it this year. It's
Okay,
up
early,
at some
late?
point. Oh,
Yeah,
I
nobody
want to
knows.
say April, but I'd have to double check and get back to you on that. Do you know, Lisa? Your mic's on.
I don't know, but I did just turn on my mic. The last time we did this, we actually came to council for direction to RFP. So that might be something that we can commit to, or if council wants to give us that direction, you can do that in a motion, so that, because there's no point in going out to market if you don't want to proceed with the program.
Yeah, and I can double check and find out exactly when that's up so that we can have that conversation in advance with council.
Thank
for
you,
sure.
Dr. Powell.
Yep.
And just, anyways, I think.
Rabbit hole? Uh-huh. Good job. Noted that you jumped over it instead of in it. We're trying to congratulate each other every time we don't go down a rabbit hole. Well, so well done. I think you all probably could guess at the core functions of fire, fire education and prevention, safety standards and enforcement, emergency response on lots of things, certainly not just fire, and fire code and plan reviews. The priorities for the year for the fire department, in addition to hiring a new chief, which I note he did not put in his business plan priority, but it's in mine, is to complete a suite of fire rescue services in a safe, timely manner, expand our peak staffing program so that we have 3 firefighters in the hall at all times, every day, 24/7, onboard a new fire prevention officer, complete the professional development of paid response firefighters, and then we're planning to build a new fire hall. So that project will also need a lot of support. That's a facilities project, but fire is obviously a key stakeholder. So there's a lot of work for fire in that project. Unfunded in this budget is the increase to 4 full-time staff in the hall 24/7. And in order to explain to you, this is where the deep dive comes in, why that's not in this budget, I'm going to switch PowerPoints and go to a different one and walk you through a bit of a 5 or 6 year history of fire funding. So, yeah, get comfy. I find it fascinating. But so this is a bit of, it might be. It could be. I just found this picture and I thought it was good. There's lots of good ones. So in terms of the fire department, I wanted to walk you through various spends in the fire department in the last 5 to 6 years, both capital and operating. So I'm going to start with capital, especially around equipment. So in 10 years, we will replace 4 what they call heavy apparatus, or lay people like me call fire trucks. We started in 2015, 2016 and spent $635,000 on a pumper truck. In 2017 to 19, it takes several years when you order a fire truck. They're not just sitting in a, they build them to spec. They're specially designed based on what you order, so they take a while. We spent $884,000 on a second pumper truck. Right now, we're working budgeted in 2020, and the chief is trying to complete another truck replacement. It's budgeted for $850. I'm not sure what it's going to come in at. And then in your long-term capital, you'll see in 2026 replacement of the ladder truck, which is in this picture here. For right now, today's cost at $1.3 million. So more. Are you jumping up? He feels strongly. So, $3.7 million in 10 years to replace all our fire trucks. All to say, our trucks should be in really good shape for another 10 to 20 years, coming up pretty quick here. So we're in good shape with our heavy apparatus. In addition, in the last 5 years, we've spent over $725,000 on a variety of items. A sprinkler protection unit that the last council added in to a capital a couple years ago. We spent $60,000 on an operation management system, which is a fancy way for saying a software for IT to be able to track and monitor our fire calls, and then a variety of other things for ongoing life cycling of fire gear and smaller apparatus. So the fire has a lot of equipment that has to be life cycled regularly. Their breathing apparatus, if you're going into a smoky, they don't sit on a shelf forever. So we have a very robust budget to keep those things in good working order and to replace them regularly. We've also spent some money on capital for staffing and the fire hall. And Lisa referred to this in her presentation last week. We spent $60,000 in 2016 having a fire master plan and staffing study created that did a deep dive into our staffing model and all of our fire operations and set forward a bunch of targets and metrics for us to use and several recommendations to help us move forward. We've spent $2.6 million so far in building prep, and the capital budget that you'll be asked to approve has $14.65 million budgeted for a new fire hall. So the total capital investment in the last 6 years is over almost $22 million, a little over 17 for the new hall and almost 4.5 for apparatus and gear. Go ahead, do you have a question? Yeah.
I totally do. The 4 new trucks. What are the lifespans of those trucks?
They're between 20 and 30 years, depending.
And when we get these new trucks, they're a capital project, but then are we operationalizing their replacement costs? Just like we do with other, other big infrastructure? Are we putting away money every year to replace them?
Oh, well, that would be part of, look at Rick now. This would be part of the conversation we had last week about the amount of money that we put into reserves, right? So, do we put the full replacement cost in? No, we don't, but you are putting some in, and a lot of that happens at year end with surplus when you allocate where the surplus goes. Yeah.
I remember back in the day when the Bronto was bought. It was a very big cost for this town. Yeah. And people still talk about it.
People still talk about the Bronto. Yeah. It's up for replacement in 2026. Yeah. So that's probably a 20-year life cycle, I'm guessing, on that Bronto. I think it was, maybe 25. I think it's been 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do we get any revenue from selling the old one then?
Not much. No. Not anything significant that hits the budget in a substantial way. They're life-cycled old machines, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Crozer, are you looking to buy a fire truck?
Yeah.
One never knows. And then in terms of the operating budget, we've also made a good investment in our education and training. That was one of the recommendations in the fire master plan, was around our approach to education and training. So we have had an ongoing increased investment in education and training. Aside from a pandemic blip, the education and training budget has pretty much doubled in 6 years. So we did decrease it in 2020 and 2021. A lot of the on-the-ground training that they mostly have been doing virtual training for the better part of a year. But in 2022, we get it back up to where it was pre-pandemic, which is double of where it was in 2016. And then around staffing, we've also made a fairly significant investment in staffing. So in 2016, we brought in a part-time administrative assistant. Before then, I don't really know how. We didn't have one. Yeah, honestly, I don't know how. But now we do. In 2017, we brought in a deputy fire chief. So there's the chief, the deputy chief, and then the captains and the active crews. So the chief and the deputy are administrative. They don't ride on the truck and put out fires, although sometimes they do attend calls, but they are purely administrative staff. In 2018, we moved that administrative assistant position to full-time. In 2019, we introduced peak staffing, which I'll get into a little bit more in a minute. In 2020, we added a fire prevention officer. And then Chief Gaylor, who you met at your orientation, in his time here has introduced a qualification and rank steps program. So for all of our fighters now, that there is a way to move through. We now basically have a salary grid in fire that is based on how long you've been in the department, what training you've done, how many calls you attend, interviews you've had with the fire chief and deputy chief. So he's put in a system that allows people to move through a grid. Before, we did not have a clear or consistent way for that to happen, and that's had some impact on our staffing budgets as well. And then we've had ongoing union salary negotiations, which I put in as about an average 2% increase. Anyway, so that affects our staffing budget. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. And Teresa, yeah, I'm rabbit hole. Okay. Fire response, and a nod to the chief, he always says in a nutshell. So our fire department is run on what's called a composite model. And it probably will be for quite some time that we have a composite, what's called a composite fire department. So that's a combination of full-time and paid on-call staff. There is no such thing anymore as volunteer firefighters. Anybody who attends a fire call is paged, and they are paid for their time. But there are people who are full-time in the hall, and that's their job. They're ready and waiting for a call. Other people are, just like you and I, out doing other jobs, living their lives, and when a call comes in, they run to the hall and attend the fire. Those folks are called paid on-call. And we have two types of on-call employees. Casuals are union, part of the union, and they have a certain requirement for training and certification that allows them to cover shifts. So if a full-time firefighter is sick or away on training, a casual firefighter can fill one of their regular shifts. Paid response are non-union employees, and they really only attend general paid response. So if there's a house on fire and the fire truck drives and they get there and realize, oh my gosh, we're gonna need more folks, paid responders can go to those calls. We do have an agreement with the union if it's an extreme emergency and there are no casuals available, a top qualified paid responder can fill a shift, but it is the exception, not the rule, and they're not part of the union. So we really have three different types of employees: full-time, casual, and paid response. And for as long as I've worked at the town, we've had 2 staff in the hall at all times. And they work either a 10-hour day shift or a 14-hour night shift. And it's that 14-hour night shift that requires that we have to have sleeping quarters in the hall. And historically, they responded to calls, just 2 on a truck, and they would call in for additional staff as needed. I believe it was 2016, it might have been a bit earlier, the previous chief made a chain and run orders where instead of sending a truck with 2, the truck would wait at the hall for 2 more on-call staff to arrive and then go to whatever the call was with 4. And that was done as part of a safety standard, the National Fire Protection Standard, National Fire Protection Association, NFPA standard, which is not a rule or a requirement, but it is a best practice. But this has also led to an increase in what's called a general page, which is how you get your on-call firefighters to the hall, is when there's a general page. And one of the trends we were seeing is it was really leading to burnout because we were having a high volume of calls and people were being called all the time and it was too much. And part of what happens is that people who are trained to do things like respond to fire are not motivated for non-fire calls. And I'm not saying that they don't come and they don't do a good job. They do come and they do an amazing job. But we often have more alarm calls than we have fire calls. And it's a lot if you're leaving a family dinner or leaving your job to run to the fire hall to attend a false alarm. And so we started to see burnout and lower numbers of people responding to our general pages. And As a nod to the chief, I wanted to put in a chart because he really likes them. But what you'll see is the blue here is medical calls. It's the predominant thing that we are called to, medical calls. And again, those are only Delta and Echo calls, not all medical calls. Red is fire, yellow is hazmat, orange is rescue, purple is motor vehicle, green is alarm, and then gray is other. And other really is things like cat in a tree, or I smell something funny, or people who need help with more random, anything not in all those other categories. So even for medical responses, when we run with 4 on a truck, a lot of times it's people leaving their work or their family for medical response calls. So we instituted because of the recommendation of the staffing study, peak staffing. And it, as I said, it was recommended. And what they recommended we start with was just in the summer. So when you look at our data, we have the most number of calls during the summer, specifically June, July, and August. And the traffic congestion in town can make it difficult for people to get to the hall, right? Because you all know what busy downtown is like. We actually see a lot of people come to the hall on bicycles because it's faster. And the idea was if we had 4 in the hall in the summer, it would decrease the amount of general pages we need, and then people could do things like take vacation and have family time and have less fatigue for our on-call staff. So what we saw was an increase in response time and a decrease in the need for general pages, and it allowed the full-time staff to also work on things like inspection, planning, safety education, and other things. And the recommendation was that we gathered metrics on how this worked. And then after 5 years of peak staffing, the staffing study recommends that we determine if we need to increase to 4 in the hall. But part of the challenge has always been, in order to move to 4 in the hall at all times, you actually have to you have to double the staffing complement. So you need 8 people in order to cover both shifts, day and night. And the cost to do that has always been close to, if not more than, the council direction of the budget for the year. So to go from the current 8 full-time firefighters to 16 has historically eaten up the entire budget that been allotted from council to bring to them. So it's been really challenging to figure out how to do the shift from peak staffing to full-time. But we did start peak staffing in 2019. We added 2 firefighters per day, but only for the day shifts, because part of the challenge with getting people to the hall was the traffic and congestion in town, and there's much less of it at night. So in 2019, we had 4 firefighters in the hall for day shifts and only 2 at night. We relied on the general pages at night and the 4 during the day. And that worked really well. So we did general pages only if extra staff were needed. And the fact that it was days only made it faster for staff to get to hall, allowed staff to get to the hall at night. And it was a very successful trial. We reduced the number of general pages, we increased firefighter turnout, and we had improved response times all over town. So we continued it in 2020. And the plan was to continue the very same model in 2020. To have it be for day shifts, again only, but increase the span of time, May to September. So there was an $80,000 budget increase in 2020. That's not the total cost of peak staffing, but so when you increase peak staffing, you decrease the amount of general pages, so the net change was $80,000 in 2020. But what happened in 2020 is there was a pandemic. And so there was concern right away all across the country, especially early on, like when we didn't really know how this thing worked, right? There was concern about fire staff exposure. We had a couple of calls locally where they were called for a medical that sounded like it might be a heart attack or some kind of known medical condition, but was actually a coronavirus call. And the staff exposure early on was quite high. So, and the concern was that we could have a staff of 4 suddenly all be in isolation for 2 weeks, and that has a huge impact on our fire operations. And so the chief really worked to come up with a plan to minimize the number of general pages and our exposure potential. And so he came to the council of the day with the request to take the same budget, so there was no budget change, but instead of 4 in the hall, to move immediately to 3 in the hall all day. So on both shifts, the day shift and the night shift, we had 3 firefighters in the hall at all times. That started in mid-April and went to mid-September in 2020. And the chief changed the rolling order, meaning that they went to all calls with 3 in the truck. And then If they got there and more staff were needed, they issued a general page. This is what the chief calls dynamic steering, and we tease him about it because he said it in his interview, and we throw it back at him all the time as dynamic steering. But really what we found is that it's been successful operationally and cost effective, and it allowed us, what it did is this plan that happened in 2020, is it allowed us to create a way to incrementally move to 4 in the hall at all times in a way that is affordable for the municipality. So in 2021, the budget for this year, we increased it again to a $46,000 budget increase. That's not the total cost of peak staffing, but it's offset by other savings to have 3 in the hall for 8 months. And that's what we've done this year. From March to October, there were 3 firefighters in the hall at all times, and they ran to all the calls. In 2022, there is, again, a $92,000 budget increase for 3 in the hall for 12 months. So the idea is all year long, there will always be 3 fires in the hall, and they will run. That's what's in front of in the budget in front of you for this year. Since 2019, just so you're clear on how this, yeah, go ahead.
So for 2021, for 8 months, it was 46,000. But in 2022, it's double that for just 4 more months?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And then if you look at your budget, that 92,000 is hard to see. So in 1 minute, I will explain how that happens. But it's a great question. Yeah. So in 2019, since 2019, when we've been doing these peak staffing shifts, we haven't hired a full-time person to do that. The chief has put them available as a shift to be covered, and all the casual staff have been welcome to sign up for shifts. And so what's happened this year and what will happen based on what's proposed in 2022 is not the hiring of people in full-time positions. It's just, again, a full year of shifts. And casual staff, he works with them to make sure it's equitable, that staff who are interested in the shifts get a reasonable amount, that's not heavy to one staff or the other, that based on people's interest and availability, they get an equitable number of shifts. And then our plan has in 2023 that we'll convert those to full-time, that we'll hire 4 new staff. So there's a cost difference between when they're casual versus when they become full-time. That costs us more. And then we'll start to add 5 months of a 4th person, and the cost for that is $290,000 in 2013. That's what's in your budget. So I'm getting to your question, Councillor Graham. I'm getting there. In 2013, just to be clear, we had 3 months of 4 on during the days only. In 2020, we had 5 months of 3 on at all time. In 2021, we've had 8 months of 3 on at all time, and what we're proposing for 2020 is 12 months of 3 on at all time. The plan for 2023 is to increase the full-time complement, so we'll hire 4 new staff, and then we'll begin 5 months of 4 in the hall at all times. In 2024, that'll move to 8 months of 4 in the hall at all time. In 2025, 12 months of 4 in the hall at all time. And in 2026, increase the full-time complement and fully hire so that we essentially double the amount of current full-time staff we have. So this is an incremental plan to get us there in a way that fits within our general budget increases over the last several years and phases it in. This is another chart from the chief. The red is peak staffing in 2021. So the big box shows the months that we ran peak staffing, and the red line shows the number of general pages. So you'll note outside of the red box, the general page number, especially at the beginning of the year, is quite high, and then the general pages really drop when we have that peak staffing. The yellow is the 2020 months, so a smaller window, but again, you can see inside the yellow box that the line, the number of general pages is much lower when we have the 3 in the hall all the time, and then the general pages go up when we don't have that peak staffing. And then this is just the turnout, so the number of firefighters who turn out or show up when we have a general page. And again, you'll see this is for 2021, that by having that peak staffing in place, the bars, the big, tall, the vertical bars are the number of calls. The blue line across is the number of people who turn out. We're able to keep a relatively stable turnout number by having peak staff in, because we're not overburdening them like we are in January and February through the rest of the year. So basically the idea is the metrics are good. The phased-in plan to increase staffing is working. Our general pages, the numbers are down. The staff response is more consistent because we call when we really need them, and they're attending things that they are trained to attend to, and that are more interesting and part of what they're interested in serving the community to do. We also have faster arrival times. We're on scene faster with peak staffing. We can't begin a fire attack with 3, but we can begin assessment and planning and be on site earlier than if we wait. So far, the plan is working. In terms of the budget, to your question, Councillor Graham, this year, the overall increase to the budget is $92,000. But it's hard to see because the actual increase to the salaries, wages, and benefits line is only $5,000. The actual cost of just peak staffing, increasing those staffing numbers, is $142,000. But it's offset by several reductions. So the staffing budget in fire is not for the faint of heart. It is incredibly complex. And the chief does an incredible job of managing it, I do have to say. So both with the full-time and the administrative staff, there's some salary reductions this year based on actuals. I mentioned earlier that he's put in this system for how people move through the salary grid. So there are now different rates for casual and paid response staff, depending on how much training and qualification and time in the job they have. So that's led to some budget adjustments. We just did a paid response recruitment this year. So we now have real numbers for where people fit on that grid based on who we recruited. So the predictability for that budget is better for 2022 than it was for 2021. And the chief manages very vigorously. He's really restricted overtime. So full-time firefighters get very little overtime. Historically, overtime was quite a high budget line for us because we needed people to fill the calls. They now only, if you're not on shift, most of them full-time firefighters don't go to general pages unless it's a full-on fire and we need all hands on deck. So there's a significant drop in overtime. And then when we introduce peak staffing, as you just saw in that last chart, we reduce the number of general pages we need, so the response budget also shrinks. So to your question about how come it's this number, but it shows up as this number, or there's offsetting costs, it's all these various budget line and metrics in the background where there's an increase in one and a reduction in another. And I can see my friend, Mr. Irwin, in the corner has something to add there. Go ahead.
I can even simplify it even more, maybe.
Woo.
For 2021, the shift in pure hours was 0. It was roughly 4,000 hours more in peak and 4,000 less in casual. So really it was the incremental difference in pay rate. So that's where the $46,000 came from. So net hours is 0. For 2022, it's a net increase of 1,200 hours. So that's why it's more. It's $90,000 more.
It's not a simple in and out.
No,
Yeah.
there's lots, but in the big numbers, that's what it is. So.
Yeah, what we're flagging for you is the net budget change. So if we didn't increase peak staffing, if we kept the status quo budget right now that we have for 2021 and did not increase peak staffing into 2022, the salaries, wages, and benefit line would decrease by $92,000 this year. So in terms of the big picture of fire and the budgeted salaries, wages, and benefits, in the last 6 years, this line of our budget has increased. We've made a $1 million investment in salaries, wages, and benefits in the fire department. So in 2016, we started at 1.5 million. In 2022, we're at 2.5 million. So we anticipate if we implement the plan in the phased way that I just presented, it will be, and this is a very back of napkin number, an additional 700,000 in the next 5 years to move to 4 in the hall full time. So that would be a 1.7. Again, the 0.7 is rough in 11 years to increase to the salaries, wages, and benefits line of the fire department. There's not much revenue offset from the fire department. It's quite small. So in 2016, the revenue was $81,000. It increased very ambitiously in 2017 and 18. I'm not sure why, I can't remember, to $151,000, which we did not meet. And so it was brought down to $120,000 in 2019, and it remains at $120,000. Some of that is our agreement with places like the MD of Bighorn. We have a few small fee for services. I believe there's some opportunity for a bit of revenue with motor vehicle collisions and false alarms. It's just not something, in terms of all the priorities on the chief's plate, it's not something we've gotten to. maybe in future years. But it won't, I mean, this is not a revenue-heavy department, right? It's mostly funded from taxes. So in terms of the total operating budget, in 2016, we started at 1.6 million. In 2022, the proposed budget is 2.74 million. 30,000 of that is emergency management. The rest is fire. So it's an increase of almost 1.5 million in 6 years. Again, almost doubling the total operating budget. So that's my deep dive into fire.
So I want to say, first of all, that was awesome.
Oh, thanks.
I very much appreciated that in-depth overview. It answered a lot of questions. And I know that during the campaign, a number of us were approached with, encouraging to move to that 4 in the hall at all times right away. And what is clear is the end destination is the same, whether it's being encouraged to go there right now or through this path that Dr. Cottle just outlined. So really the question is about speed and whether or not there's an appetite to spend more money. But it's not about a different vision as to where we're going. So I just wanted to thank you for making that very clear.
Yeah, and that's well said, Mayor Krausert. I completely agree with that assessment. We agree that we need to move to 4 in the hall. It's really the question of how we can do it in a way that is sustainable. Yeah. And it's completely at council's discretion at what you want to fund and how you want to fund it. But when we bring a budget forward, we look at, as you've heard this morning, all of the asks in the organization. Every department is under pressure. I really appreciated, Whitney could have made a plug for more positions in planning this morning, but she acknowledged the stress and pressures on all the departments. And so we agree completely on the end destination and are trying to find a way to fund it that allows for good metrics and community safety and affordability in terms of tax increases.
And it's very clear that you've provided us this information that we're well along as a town, we're well along a journey to get there, and a lot of movement has taken place in a relatively short period of time. So thank you. Councillor
Questions? Yeah.
So in 2026, will that be the end of paid on-call?
That would be the end of the paid on-call plan. Yes, we would still be a composite department so that, no, it wouldn't be the end, it would be the end of peak staffing, not the end of paid on-call. So,
Okay.
Sorry, there's so many terms. So we will continue to be a composite fire department. So if there's a house fire and we have 4 full-time firefighters in the truck and they get there in 3 minutes, which will be awesome. They will need more than 4 people likely to put that fire out. So we will then have a general page and we'll have casual and paid response firefighters who still come and respond. Okay. When a full-time firefighter goes on vacation or attends a training or calls in sick, we'll still need casual staff to fill that shift. So we will, for the foreseeable future, be a composite department, which means we always have on-call staff. It's just that we will really only call them when we really need them,
right, so the
instead of for every call.
Will be far
really
less.
low.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And is there any anticipation it'll be tough to keep paid on-call people motivated to be part of the program when the general pages diminish?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's always that it's tricky, it's challenging. We are having better success when we have kept the number of general pages low and meaningful rather than constant, right? So that's definitely made a big difference. For years, when I first started in this position, which was 2015 or 2016, I can't even remember, we were a feeder for Calgary. So people would get on with us as a paid responder, fall in love with the work, and then end up applying and getting on in the Calgary Fire Department. But we've also seen the reverse of that. We have some folks who are paid response or casual staff who have had careers in Calgary and moved to Canmore. Maybe they still work in Calgary, but they pick up shifts here, or they're not doing that full time, but they still have the skills, so they're part of our complement. So we're really trying to find a balance on how to keep people motivated.
Okay, great.
It's tricky.
Yeah, I was just curious what happens in 2026 after. And looking at, like this is great how you guys have this all outlined. In 2022, for that 92K budget for 3 in the hall for 12 months, is there a comparable for 92K? What do we get for 4 in the hall for a fewer bunch of months? I was just curious, did we go peak time that June, July, August? So we went 4, and then we went to 3 for a little less. I'm
Oh,
just
yeah,
curious.
I see what you're saying. I don't
Like
have
that
that at my
scenario.
fingertips. But, you know, to the conversation earlier about process, if you'd like to see those numbers, we can get them for you. I just
I don't know
don't
if I
have
want
them. I don't have them in front of me today, but if
Yeah.
you, as we're doing if you'd like us to bring that back, some options of what that could look like, that's the kind of thing that when Mayor Krausert was talking earlier about the process of motions you might bring forward, if you give us some direction on what you'd look like there, we can bring that back to a future meeting of what that cost would be.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just quickly, how many paid response firefighters do we have?
Oh, I have to remember. It was in the chief's orientation.
19,
I want to say 15?
19.
19.
19.
19 paid responders?
So when the average turnout was there, I think it was somewhere around 8 to 10. So we'd get about half out on a general page.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I'd need to dig into that to be clear. But we get a sustainable turnout, is what he's telling me.
it was pretty.
Yeah.
It was pretty consistent. So I was just curious as to if that was.
Half the I'll have to look. I can pull that and email it to you. Yeah.
Question?
Karen, did you have, Councillor Marin, did you have a question? Okay. You turned it off.
Sorry. There we go. I'm just curious in this chart here with medical calls, et cetera, is there any opportunity or money from Alberta Health Services or anyone that would provide some monies for training for our staff, like in the medical side of things?
No. The short
simple
answer
answer
is
is
no.
no.
I mean, we could try to bill the province, but that bill would go unpaid. So right now, the training for our staff to provide any medical assistance is part of the training suite that we provide through taxes. Where right now there's no billability.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Therese.
We have 19 casual and 17 paid responders. Sorry, I had the numbers reversed.
Thank you.
And I went back and took a look, and it looks like it fluctuates between 7 and 10 is the average throughout the year that we get a turnout. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the casuals are folks who have EMT jobs in other places, so they're not available to respond every day, right? It's that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Councillor Graham?
Councillor Graham?
Just a general comment along Councillor Mara's the general theme we keep hearing is the province keeps downloading charges onto us, and time again. Have you heard that before, Ms. McCallum? Councillor, I'm sorry. We'll get there. Give me a couple more, we'll totally get there. And we keep picking up the slack for the province's shortcomings, time and time again. And what if we didn't do that?
Yep, we could. And earlier this week, Mayor Krausert and Chief Gaylor and I had a brief meeting, and we discussed exactly that. We could stop. And in fact, I believe it was the city of Airdrie who stopped attending medical calls. And what happened almost immediately was community outcry to the municipality to step up and to not leave people in the lurch. So we could stop. It's purely at our discretion that we do that. But what tends to happen is that the community looks to the local body who they believe are capable and not, it's harder to put pressure on the province. They're not in the street and on the grocery store and local business owners. So ARG stopped the practice and then immediately started again.
While the principal would in fact send a statement to perhaps AHS, in practice, the people that get hurt are our community.
Are your residents?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that statement. Some good communications around, if we were to look at something like that, I don't know. When do you start to push back? When do you say enough is enough?
Mm-hmm.
That they want to keep cutting budgets and downloading stuff on us, then maybe it's time to push back on those a little bit.
Welcome to Town Council,
Thank you
Councillor
very much.
Graham.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Mayor Krausert. And thank you, Dr. Cottle, for this very fulsome presentation. I had a couple of questions, again, things that came out of the election. So you described earlier in your presentation that training for the fire paid response, Wednesday Night Fire Club, basically, had switched to a more virtual model and came down in cost as a result of that. Do you feel at any point that our paid response members were being provided a disservice, that they would be unprepared then because of the type of training that they receive or the way it was being delivered?
You know, I don't know enough. I don't run into burning buildings, and you don't want me to.
No, man.
Yeah.
Me neither.
But I do trust the chief. And again, part of what happened early on was about the unknowns of the pandemic,
Yes.
right? There was just so much we didn't know. So what they did do virtual for a while, and I think they still are some components that are virtual, but then they started rotating the Wednesday night. So Wednesday night, just so everybody knows, 7 to 10, it's training at the fire hall. And it's not mandatory that you come, but they do track who comes, and there's a certain number every year that you need to make. I believe they take July and August off to give everybody a bit of a break. But they did move then to classes, so you were on this Wednesday, and the next Wednesday you were off, to create some social distancing. And you know, I know that virtual has a place, but you also need hands-on touch, real, and I believe that the chief did everything that they could within COVID protocols to make sure people had the proper and appropriate training. Our training program is something that was flagged in the 2016 Dillon report, and one of the things that Chief Gaylor has really taken on with gusto in his short time with us to revamp and revitalize that training program to make sure it's appropriate for our fire service. So I can't really answer your question except to say I know from my conversations it's been a real focus, and I believe he did the best he could in COVID constraints to make sure people had the best training they could.
Gotcha. So that would be more COVID influenced than budget influenced at the time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, okay. So then to take that further, would we have at any point put paid response members in a position where they would not be trained for the situation at hand? They would not be prepared with their training for the situation at hand.
That should not happen.
No.
And again, there is a protocol where when you are hired on as a paid responder, there's a certain number of stages you have to go through and complete before you can be active on a call.
Gotcha.
And it might be, I don't know, I mean, again, I stay out of the run orders of fire. It might be that they're allowed to attend a call, but the roles that they would have at the call are dictated by a fire safety practice.
Right, so you wouldn't have a captain that would be particularly having to alter the response to the fire based on the inadequacies of the people perhaps that were in the back seat.
That should not happen, but again, it will depend on who calls out. Individual firefighters may, a lot of what happens in fire, and again, I'm not a firefighter,
I know.
is relationship,
Yep.
right? And part of the way you get relationships is putting in time. And so there may be an individual firefighter who does not feel comfortable with a new member because they haven't put in time. But that doesn't mean that that new member isn't trained or capable of doing the work. It might be more of a relationship or how many calls we've been on or comfort issue. But those are all operational things that are addressed within the fire hall. And again, that the chief would take very seriously. So he would not allow someone to attend a call if he did not believe they were prepared and capable.
Okay.
If I might add to that, because of a conversation earlier this week with Chief Gaylor, he says that when you attend a call, you actually adjust the plan based on numbers that show up, who shows up, because there will be different people, the different specialties or whatever, and what you're being presented with, right? So you're constantly changing the plan based on who's in the truck, but it's not necessarily because they're untrained, it's just because
Of the
The circumstance.
circumstance
it's
that you're
a
facing.
fluid situation.
Yep,
He
absolutely.
used in this meeting an example of a fire that happened in town a couple years ago where we had 4 on the truck that went to the scene, but when they got there, they couldn't start the attack, even though that's what you need to be able to start the attack, because it was the dead of winter and pipes were frozen and they couldn't get the, what's the red thing?
Hydrant.
Thank you. Oh, they couldn't get the hydrant to work. So 2 firefighters who should have been attacking the fire were having to mess around with the hydrant, and they had to call for a general page for 2 more to come. Gotcha. So even though they got to the fire with the technical appropriate number to begin, the response to the fire was delayed because of the circumstance.
Because of Murphy's Law.
And we did not lose that house.
No. My next question, I just have one other after this one, is if we were ever in a situation where somebody that perhaps didn't have the right training, let me reword this, that the captain might not think that they have the most fulsome training about time, relationship, et cetera, whatever the reason. Is that captain responsible for their behavior? Like, is there financially liable? I'm sorry, these are
Yeah,
these are all
I'm
campaign
totally heard
questions that
this.
we all
I'm
have.
trying to understand how this is related to budget, and maybe we would need, so.
Maybe, but I think
and
it actually has to do with the 4 on the truck question, and that's where these questions are
Right.
going to.
And I know Chief Gaylor did answer some of that question. It was in orientation. If you maybe, Sally, if you wanted to repeat that response that he gave, that, I mean, the captain's responsibility is to keep the fire scene safe.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So as Mayor Krausert was just suggesting, they will adapt their response to keep people safe.
Okay.
That is their primary role. So nobody is having their safety compromised.
No, okay. My question is about liability with regards to that.
Yeah.
Because,
And-
so
and-
I'm
and
not
I s-
asking any questions that I don't think anybody here has had questioned themselves during the campaign period, and these questions all relate to 4 on a truck.
Yeah, and I see that as well, because, and I asked Chief Gaylor about this as well, and, obviously, he indicates liability only arises when you do something negligently. And if you're acting reasonably, which they're all trained to do, and within those bounds, then the liability will not arise. But we certainly have been subjected to a lot of questions around this, and so this clarity is an excellent opportunity because it goes to assess whether or not we want to or have to spend more to get to the 4 in the hall faster. And so I think that there's...
Yeah, so
So I'm not trying to be offensive
No,
at
no.
all. I'm not trying, and I apologize, honestly, I apologize if that's what I'm coming across. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm trying to ask questions that I know all of us were presented with during the campaign to determine the budget with regards to having 4 in a truck and accelerating the plan moving forward. I personally don't think we need to accelerate the plan at this point, based on the information that I've seen and the 11 years of history I have with the fire department. But I'm still doing my job by asking these questions in a public format during budget.
So I'm happy to repeat
Yeah.
to Ms. DeSoto's point what the
Thank
chief
you.
said during your orientation, which is no fire staff has raised a concern with him about the safety of their team.
Thank you.
So that is the responsibility. If one of the employees have a responsibility to not perform safe work, they also have a responsibility to report unsafe work. So that has not happened. The chief also is not aware of any concerns of personal liability, and he does not believe that they exist in the Canmore Fire Department, that the protocols are in place to keep people safe, and that if people are acting within the bounds of the responsible protocols and the training that they have been given, there is no personal liability unless you do something that is knowingly negligent, and we don't have staff that I'm aware of who are doing those things.
Thank you.
Sorry, just,
I
I will,
appreciate-
I will add to that, because I don't know if you were asking around corporate liability, but the council has the ability to set service levels,
Yep.
right? And so whether it's 4 on the truck, 3 on the truck, or 2 on the truck, depending on the affordability of that service in your community. The NFPA standard
Is a guideline.
is a guideline, and it is not a dictated service level that you must provide.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. DeSoto. And then I have one more question.
Yeah, and then Councillor Ma. after.
Perfect. My last question is about the fire hall itself, and maybe you might not want to talk about, we can talk about this during capital or not, and it's just about an understanding that the new fire hall does not provide any net new space than the old fire hall or the existing fire hall.
Well, I guess it depends on how you talk about net new space. So the
Yes.
current fire hall is an 8-bay fire hall, and the new fire hall is an 8-bay fire hall. So we're not adding fire bays. The difference is, in the current 8-bay fire hall, 2 of those bays are not active. So right now, we do not have a place for staff to work out. And so they are using a bay for working out when they are within the hall. In the new fire hall, those 8 bays will all be for active apparatus use, and there is a separate workout facility, there is a separate storage facility. So if you're talking about bays, which tend to be how fire halls get talked about, it is not a net new increase. If you're talking about overall footprint of the facility and usability, it is a bigger building, but
Yes.
not for the bays, for the rest of the building.
And it also carries the dirty and clean areas, which we don't
Correct.
enjoy currently within our current fire hall, which are very important with regards to.
That's right.
Ms. Smithers wanted to add something?
Sorry. Yeah, just in terms of the new fire hall, and again, it will come up in the capital discussion, but it's not just the number of bays, it's the size of them. The trucks can't actually fit into all the bays that are there right now. There's also issues with not having a training area, insufficient parking. So there's a number of factors at play that the old fire hall just doesn't suit the existing fire hall just doesn't suit the future functioning of the fire department, right? So,
Totally,
but we can get into that more in the capital
No,
discussion.
I appreciate it, and thank you very much for everybody.
Yeah,
taking
no,
the
great.
time.
Thanks for your questions. I will just add to that, the fire chief, Chief Galler, has been at every meeting about the fire hall, and he is confident and has said in multiple meetings that he believes that it will serve us 50 years into the future.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Bob?
So this chart here,
Yeah.
like, that's a lot of alarms, the green ones. And so are those false alarms or just
They're
any-
not necessarily all alarms, but
Okay.
many of them are false alarms, and we're really working to try to decrease the number of false alarms. So sometimes alarm calls are just exactly that. Somebody's fire alarm has triggered, and we send firefighters, and they make sure it's all clear, and then they come home. Sometimes alarms goes off because there's a fire.
Right.
So that chart doesn't differentiate those two, but in the Dillon report, false alarms were flagged as an issue that we have been actively working to try to bring the number of those down. The other thing that's happened is that the $60,000 for the IT operating system allows us a tracking mechanism. So we just, in this year, have got that system up and running where we can tell who our frequent flyers are. And if we have a building or a property that has frequent false alarms, we now have the ability to follow up and start to charge them. And before, we just didn't have the record-keeping capability to be able to do that.
Right, yeah, because I was really intrigued when you said there might be some opportunities for cost recovery with the false
Yeah.
alarms. And just when I saw like how many green squares we have here, it's pretty significant. But I guess my other question, this kind of comes back from a place of maybe community-wide affordability. I've heard like commentary from people within the community that they're concerned that their insurance rates for their homes are going up, and they feel one of those potential factors is that data may be coming out for response times for fire. And so when they go to insure their home, it's like, oh, well, you live here. And so I'm just curious, is that sort of something that we need to explore as a potential thing that could negatively affect the affordability of our community?
Yeah, I mean, insurance rates are definitely something affecting the affordability of our community, but that is not because of our fire response. That is because of largely building materials, and the current provincial government removed the cap on insurance rates. So the fire response time is set by the Fire Underwriter Survey. We haven't had a Fire Underwriter Survey done in Canmore since 2003. And this came up in the last year with BOTA. The chief and I went to a BOTA meeting because they were flagging the same concern and worried about it. So we are in the process of updating our Fire Underwriter Survey, which is basically an assessment of all kinds of things related to fire: water, water mains, how well hydrants work, fire mapping, fire staffing. Like, it's a huge component of everything around fire response. So we are getting an updated Fire Underwriter Survey, which will have an impact on future rates. But the insurance rate changes in the community, I confirm with the Fire Underwriter Survey. Nothing around fire has led to an increase in fire rates in Canmore since 2003. So all those increases are not because insurers know that our map, of anything about our fire map. It's a whole bunch of other things in the insurance industry, not fire.
Thank you very much.
The insurance industry has been bleeding money because of all of the natural disasters. And huge dollars flowing out. And so if anything's related to it, you might want to be looking at climate change, that's increasing the number of disasters.
Yeah, but it's a real normal connection for people to make, but it just isn't the one that's playing out right now. Yeah, great question.
Any further questions?
Last one for me. And I'm sure this will come up in capital, but we have no plans for the existing fire hall's use or land going forward. Is that correct?
We don't have a plan figured out yet. We have lots of possibility, and I think there is a capital budget to look at potential uses.
Yeah, that is one of the priorities in the Facilities Department that I referred to, where we're going to be looking at a decision framework essentially for use of all town assets and facilities, and then we'll be applying that framework to the existing fire hall, because once it's vacated, there are as many ideas about what should be done with that building as there are people who talk about it. So we do need a decision framework to kind of guide us through that, to come up with a bit of a cost benefit on the best use for that building. And that is in the the facilities capital budget.
Yeah.
Councillor Faubert?
Thank you. This just I'm learning so much, and just one quick understanding question as well. It says our department has a complete suite of fire rescue services. What services do we provide above and beyond what other departments in Alberta provide because we're in the mountains?
Yeah, so water rescue would certainly be one of them. Rescue service, we have a little Kubota that goes out on trails. You know, one of the real challenges is that the Canmore Nordic Centre is called the Canmore Nordic Centre, but it's not within the boundary of the town of Canmore. But what happens all the time is when people fall off their bike or whatever and they call 911, people say, "Where are you?" They say, "Canmore." And so we tend to get dispatched. Same with the river. I mean, the river is actually in Canmore, but it's not our jurisdiction. So those types of things, rescue, hazmat, potentially. Some communities really rely on hazmat specialists. We don't do that much hazmat, but it is something we're training. So rescue, hazmat, and river would probably be the biggest.
And those would affect the equipment and training
We own a
budgets as
boat.
well. Yeah. We didn't used to own a boat.
We didn't used to own a boat. But
Where
what would
did we-
happen when we didn't own a boat is that our firefighters would get called and we would be waiting for Kananaskis Public Safety to make it to the river, and they have a much bigger footprint to cover. And so our firefighters would be on the shore and there would be someone in the water in need and people would be standing around yelling at them, "Why aren't you helping?" And we didn't have a way to get them safely in the river. So we have a boat. You said you were done.
Get used to it. So another instance of where the province is downloading their services onto us.
Well, that's an interesting one because the province, there's a bit of tension sometimes between responders, between Kananaskis Public Safety and fire. Kananaskis Public Safety would like those calls to go to them, but a lot of times it's all about dispatch and how the call comes into dispatch. People say, "I'm in the water in Canmore," and our firefighters get called. So the chief is actually working with Kananaskis Public Safety to manage those calls. If they are nearby and can get there quickly, we work with them to help them get there. Other times they're not available and they ask us to go, so we're working on streamlining that. So that one is actually a bit of an exception. Part of the challenge is that they have a much bigger geographical range to cover. So sometimes we are closer and can get there first, but we actually are actively working with them to manage those calls appropriately. So that is a good news story.
All right, seeing no more questions, I'm wondering if this is a good time for a quick break before you head into the
All I
rec
have left
service.
is recreation. I'm happy to take a break, but then you will be done with me.
Okay, how long do you think? Because
Well, how many questions?
I know there's lots of server.
Why don't we take a break? Let's take a break.
Yeah, okay. So 10 minutes?
All the questions.
10 minutes. And we're back.
And we're back, and I'm almost done, promise. I'm tired of listening to me, so apologies to you. But we're in the last official department in municipal services, which is the Recreation Department. The roll-up for this department is on page 33, and then we'll go through each department separately. In terms of the roll-up, you'll note that in the revenue, in 2021, there was $1 million transfer from tax stabilization to help get us through COVID. That comes out in 2022, and we're trying to return that to recreation revenue. Recreation is funded largely through sale of service and rentals. We have had to make several COVID adjustments in the last couple of years. And in the salaries, wages, and benefits line, you may recall from orientation, I mentioned that our instructors, people who, mostly fitness instructors, are no longer contractors. They're now employees per CRA. We also have done a conversion of a number of casual hours into part-time positions, and I'll talk about that a bit more in the specific departments as we go through. But that's some of the variances that you see in that large roll-up. So the first department is administration and rentals, and this is, again, management, your management group, the manager and admin support, and facility rentals and customer experience at Elevation Place and the Rec Center. And so again, this is funded from sale of service and rentals, and really they administer access to our outdoor amenities. They create and maintain a lot of working relationships with community and with user groups. They provide customer service that's proactive and attentive, and we're really working in recreation to reduce barriers to access. In terms of the variances, the admin and general service, because we're expecting an increase in memberships, we're expecting an increase in credit card and other fees. And as Elevation Place is open, there's a front counter that does a sale of service for a variety of things that users tend to forget. So we're buying more of those materials, which will ultimately, hopefully, be offset in revenue, but that's some of those increases. And then in the contracted services line, recreation is one of the departments, because we were largely closed or open and closed during COVID. We took out their education and training budgets, so those are all returning in 2022, getting staff some training and education. In terms of the business plan for administration and rentals, the focus really is on growing usage back to pre-pandemic levels and continuing to adjust operations as we figure out, I don't know if the pandemic ends or the new normal or whatever the next is around the pandemic. We're going to work to enhance business processes to gain efficiency and enhance user experiences, similar to what Therese was saying this morning around business transformation. And there'll be a capital, no, it's not a capital project, sorry, it's in operating. Recreation is now something that can be included in the off-site levy model at the most recent MGA update, but we don't have any study or mechanism or knowledge on how to do that. So there's a small bit of money in this budget to begin to look at what it would look like to think about long-term recreation infrastructure and how it might be added to the off-site levy model. So it is in capital. Okay, thanks, Rick. Sorry. I can't, yeah. It's all a blur, the big budget blur. The next department is the Aquatics Department. And again, funded from sale of service, and big surprise that their core functions are water programs. And there is lifeguards go through staffing blips, and we're in a blip now where there's not enough lifeguards, and so we're beginning to see some potential pressure points around staffing for lifeguards that may affect our services this year. But right now we've budgeted for a full complement and normal service, and we'll just keep you posted if those staffing challenges materialize. We are also advocating for safe water recreation practices just in general. As there is more and more immigration into Canada and Alberta, the number of drownings is increasing. And as you can imagine, for staff who are trained in life-saving, that is an incredibly stressful statistic. So they really advocate not only for safe water practices within our pool, but in all water bodies. And in the last year, we've actually installed life jackets and life safety devices at Corey Lake. That was a Town of Canmore project based on some tragic events that had happened at the lake previously. So they continue to do that advocacy and education around water safety practices. And again, for new immigrants where sometimes there's barrier access or language access, they're really working on creative ways to address that in aquatics this year. So staff is one of the big business focus, again, trying to return to previous hours of service and adjusting to, the provincial guidelines as they unfold. And then there's climbing, the climbing department, and their core service is to deliver climbing programs and services. And there's nothing really significant happening in climbing this year. In terms of the budget, the salaries, wages, and benefit line, there are some hour conversions to include a climbing technician position. That's a conversion of casual hours into permanent hours. We've reinstituted education and training, and they have a bit of a change in the supplies and energy line. Our auto blaze needs some refurbishment and replacement, and so they've budgeted for that to get those devices up and running again. But otherwise, it's pretty much a status quo budget in climbing. And then programs and fitness. These are two town staff who are both retired and retiring, and they just joined us for lunch. So it's funny, I didn't know that when I put this picture in, but anyway, it was fun to see them. So recreation programs and fitness provide our program opportunities. They manage the fitness operations. They liaise with the private sector. They oversee the recreation fee assistant and campership programs, which are part of our suite of affordable services to try to make sure kids who need financial support can come to summer camp, and also look to foster the health and well-being of residents and visitors of all ages, not just those who use our recreation facilities, but to ensure people are healthy and able to recreate, even if it's not within town of Canmore facilities. And again, their programs and services are similar. We did close child-minding services during COVID and have just recently reopened them, but this budget will have them back full-time in 2022. And we are maintaining a high level of cleanliness and oversight by fitness monitors. So in the salaries, wages, and benefits line, this is where you see the instructors added in and no longer contractors, but also an increase in the number of fitness monitors to help with monitoring the facility and ensuring cleanliness. We've reinstituted education and training. In the contract budget line, there is some fitness repair and maintenance and replacement, and we really cut back last summer on all the supplies for summer camp. We just sort of made do for camp with what we had. So those supplies and some additional field trips are planned for this budget. And then, that shows up both in contract and in supplies and energy. Unfunded in this budget is an increase in operational positions from 35 to 40 hours a week. So within this recreation subdepartment, there are 2 staff who are at the coordinator level who are really more operational, and other employees in the organization work 40 hours a week, not 35. We would like ultimately to shift these staff from 35 to 40 hours, but we didn't do that this year just because the return of recreation revenue is uncertain in this post-pandemic time, and we feel that we can maintain a good level of service with these staff at these hours for another year and reassess as part of 2023. That's it. Questions?
Councillor Graham?
It strikes me as the climbing operating budgets, as well as the pool, the revenue for them is only $200,000 budgeted for 2022 and $175 for the pool. That place is busy.
A lot of what you see there is membership. So membership used to be spread out among all the departments, and it created an internal workload for no real sake. So in the overall recreation roll-up, that's where all of the membership revenue is. Those individual revenue lines would be a day pass, a rental of a climbing shoe, something that is specific to that department. So it's not an indicator of how busy the building is, it's about specific use. So maybe I teach a class and I'm bringing my kids there and I've rented the climbing gym for the day. It's that specific revenue, but the overall membership and use revenue doesn't show up in the individual department.
So the $3.1 million in the operating budget for
Recreation
administration, would be more,
Membership,
more
day
indicative
passes.
of, okay.
Yeah, so
But
we
we
used to
just don't
track,
split that
we
out.
used to try to break that out among all the sub-departments, and you can buy, as many of you may know, a day pass to Elevation Place or a membership to Elevation Place that is swim only or the whole facility, but we don't track, you know, if you come in the building with the day pass, we don't track if you're running on the treadmill or in the pool or in the climbing gym. It's all rolled up, but I can see Rick at the microphone again.
Yeah, you're saying the right thing. There was always this kind of a false allocation at the end of the day. So we'd ask, well, how much was memberships? And you'd have to add 6 numbers together, right? So to put it one spot, because every dollar that comes in, you can go into any of those places.
However, we wouldn't know if the pool was losing $2 million and the climbing gym was making 500,000.
We don't account for things like that. Like
We-
even that numbers you have right there don't have the facilities
Right.
costs in it or anything like that. The municipal finances don't count by program like that. Not specifically like that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. Go ahead, Lisa.
I'll just add and comment also on Rick's point there. We did, for the first several years after Elevation opened, really try to track closely what our cost recovery on programs was. But partly the membership model has been so successful for us. It really, really has. It's the revenue we're generating from the membership model, which gives you a membership to the entire facility. So it's a, you know, even those that only climb also get a membership, because for the one time that they want to go to the pool with their family, it's worth it, right? To have because it's such a reasonable cost, and it really is the locals' cost to get a membership rather than having to go and pay the daily drop-in rate. It's been quite a successful model for us and very difficult to allocate, as it was pointed out. And it was very, very cumbersome to try to track all of the costs associated, including, you know, IT, communications. We actually hired a communications person specifically when we opened Elevation Place. That was their main role, was to
Marketing.
for Elevation Place. So but now they're housed wholly in the communications department and do much more than just Elevation Place marketing. Yeah, so.
But there must be some tracking of numbers. They know when the climbing gym is full because they've tracked them. Like operationally, they know.
Usage, yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so would there be other indicators? I mean,
That's a fair point, for
if you have
sure.
3 million revenue, but you have nobody in the pool, you probably something to look
Right.
at.
Absolutely, and there are times where we have to have wait lines for the pool.
Exactly.
And the
for
climbing
example.
gym.
And the climbing gym.
And we do track both of those. So I don't know if we tracked exact numbers of day users, but we do track how many people are climbing, how many people are using the pool. And as we have more fitness monitors, we'll also be able to track how many people are using the fitness space. And so we can say the number of times that there's a wait list, how long people have to wait before they get in for both climbing and aquatics. Yeah. So there are some metrics, it's just not broken out financially. Yeah.
Councillor McCallum. And then Councillor Hillstock.
Curious, you explained that we might be having a blip in aquatics in terms of staffing. Are there any, I noticed at Banff, and I can't remember when it was in the last year, but you could see them trying to ramp up their own aquatics staff, which is funny because they don't actually have a pool. I think it's, they were
Sally
hoping
Borden.
to feed into the Sally B and maybe get the Borden open. Do we have sort of a recruitment plan for aquatics?
Yeah,
forward?
we have a constant recruitment plan in
Course.
recreation, let me tell
And
you.
I want to say you actually have a core staff of aquatics that have been there since before Elevation Place that are my age or younger. Alan and the Fro.
Yeah, we do have some core staff who've been with the town and for a long time and provide amazing service. And then, yes, we have quite a robust, or are working with HR to create a robust plan, and also to try to look at addressing turnover. and creating career paths that create some of that longevity that we've seen from historic employees into newer ones. So, you know, when Lisa was saying on one day, I think it was last week, that the pro forma for Elevation Place had us hiring one new person, right? And we all sort of had a good giggle about that. I mean, the other thing that's happened, aside from needing to hire way more than one person, is also that recreation and the opening of Elevation Place have transformed some of our systems and the way we operate. And recreation is one example. So I believe on one day, Tree said, you know, when she started as the manager of HR, we hired 21 people all year, and we are currently recruiting for 21, like as a point in time. And a lot of that has been around recreation. One of the things that we did when we opened, because we weren't sure how it was going to work, was created a lot of casual positions. So people similar to fire, where you call them because there's a shift here or a shift there. And what happened over time, as we were budgeting very carefully, it was an over-reliance on casual, not based on actual need. And so in the last couple of years, Rec has really been working with HR to right-size our staff complement. And some of that is converting those casual hours into part-time, which tends to create more stability in terms, because people have predictable work instead of needing to patch together 5 different jobs. And then when it turns out when you need a casual, they're not available because they've got all these other things that they're needing to do to pay the bills. So that's some of the recruiting plan that we're working on, specifically in aquatics, but it runs throughout recreation. But that's the biggest space probably. And recreation, I was saying earlier that the fire department budget is not for the faint of heart. It's also true for aquatics. So when you're scheduling aquatic programs, a certain type of lifeguard and qualification is required for one type of swim lesson versus a different swim program versus an open family swim. So even being able to predict who we need on staff when based on weather forecasts or vacation patterns, you know, it's a spreadsheet. And so we're also working with aquatics to streamline some of that and to maybe offer a little bit less variety, but a bit more stability and predictability, both for the public and for staff. Gotcha. So all those things are attempts to try to address what you're flagging.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you, Mayor Krausert. For the instructors that are no longer contractors, do we know the difference in cost for that? Just because, again, looking at the sheet, the contracted services still go up and salary, wages, benefits go up. So do we have a breakdown on if it costs us more
I don't believe
or less?
we're paying them any different.
Just say the same. Ish?
I don't have the number either, but it doesn't show on that form very well. The actual within rec programming, contracted services did go down, I think roughly 40 grand, give or take. But the child youth programming, because we didn't have any during COVID, has
Comes
gone
up,
up.
yeah.
So it nets out that it doesn't show much of a difference.
Yeah.
And that's why.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things that changed, but trying to find
Yeah,
the
trying to
change. Just to see if there was a big change, if it, if it was a big swing or if it was just basically a null, just.
Yeah, most of it's about the re-bringing in of things that didn't happen during COVID. That's why the corresponding drop isn't there. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, so when those folks were contractors, their contracted rates were quite different than the hourly rates that we're paying, but we then have to pay WCB, CPP, EI, so it sort of nets out. But really was a direction from Canada Revenue Agency, and the town of High River really, they actually were fined because they had contract people that were actually deemed to be employees by Canada Revenue. And that's the same with this case. If they work really primarily for us, if we're able to control their schedule, we tell them when they need to be where. There's a number of criteria that the CRA has put together. So we determined, we went through that evaluation and said they're actually employees, and so we needed to make that change. Yeah, but pretty close to net.
Did we have any issues with any of them that didn't want to become staff? Because I know personally, we've had people work for us that, sometimes they're like, oh, I want to just sub from you, and I don't want to be staff. So I know that can, because again, with the whole WCB thing and everything, some people just think they...
Yeah, I'm not aware, Sally. I don't know if you know.
I haven't heard of any direct complaints. I mean, we're not prohibiting those folks from working in other places, right? So I not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor McCallum, did you have another one?
Oh, no, sorry.
That's right. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Cotto.
That's it for me, thank you.
What's next? Excellent. Oh, we got lots of ways to go here.
So because I'm not prepared, I don't have my presentation loaded, so just give me 1 second. Is it? This is not going to help me, is it? But how do I get back to town?
You close it at the top, on the top far right, the X.
But there isn't a browser open anymore. Oh, sorry. Is it townsquare.canmore.ca or something? Yeah, there you go. If I'm logged in as you, I should have access.
All right.
Okay. So next, we wanted to speak to the partners and affiliates. So some of these are included within the departments that we've already spoken to today, and some have their own sheets within the operating detail. So I'm going to cover both. Within section 6 of your binders is the summary I'm going to walk through, as well as the support packages we've received from our partners and affiliates. So again, these charts are taken directly from the summary. That's your page 1 in your section 6. So first up, I was going to speak to the grant requests from our partner organizations. So we have the Biosphere with its core funding, and that is included within general municipal. So that would have been in page 6 of section 4. And then there's also Wild Smart, which is a program of the Biosphere. So I just wanted to highlight that I believe they provided a combined support package because Wild Smart is a program of the Biosphere. Then we have Bow Valley Victim Services, which is within the policing budget. Next, we have Bow Valley SPCA, so that's within bylaw services, and that's an amount that's generated from dog license and domestic animal at large ticket revenues. And then we have the Canmore Museum. So those top 4 were included within the pages we were talking to this morning within specific departments, but then the Canmore Museum is page 57 of your section 4, and that's the request that we've received from the museum. Next, we have services that are contracted to partner organizations, and these are distinct because they're based on established deliverables. So that includes Sustainable Action Canmore, that's within the Public Works admin budget, and then the Canadian Mountain Arts Foundation, and that's the Arts Place page, that's page 59 of your section 4. Then we have our affiliated organizations, and these are included when we have our consolidated financial statements. These are the organizations that are consolidated within those statements. So first we have the Canmore Library, that's page 56 of your section 4. The Canmore Community Housing, page 58. And then the Downtown Canmore Business Improvement Area. So that's covered within our general municipal section that Ms. Rogers spoke to this morning, and that's basically included in the taxes we requisition for. Then there are the requisitioning authorities. So we have Bow Valley Regional Housing Authority. So for the BIA that I was just speaking to, for the Regional Housing Authority, we get those requisitions in the start of the new year. So for the budget packages, we don't have those yet. So we just carry forward the last requisition amount we have for each of the years. So that's why you're not seeing these amounts change. But the money comes in because they're the requisitioning authority and it goes directly out. So we're including these in the summary of all the money that goes to our partners and affiliates. But again, these are the last numbers we have, and we know we'll receive revised numbers early in the new year. Lastly, I had the regional commissions, the Bow Valley Waste Management Commission, which would be within the utilities, and then the Transit Commission that was included within Ms. Smithers' presentation. So within all of those, most represented minor changes year over year, but the one item we wanted to bring to the Finance Committee's attention was just the library around 2023. So their 2022 request was $888,000 and the 2023 request was $984,000. So administration flagged that that was an increase of 10%. So I know we haven't spoken to those future years much, but while we were on the subject of partners and affiliates, we thought that this was potentially the right time to raise this. And so the library chose to reduce their 2022 request based on a surplus that they're anticipating. So should they not have had that surplus, it was more minor changes, but as the 10% was in excess of the 5% that we had received for our direction, administration did go back to the library to ask about a $50,000 reduction to bring their request increase in alignment with the 5% increase that we were holding our budget to. The library board has chosen not to adjust their submission. They believe that the only way that they could accomplish that was reducing hours, which they didn't feel prepared to do. But again, the numbers that we're providing you right now in order for administration to get 2023 down to 5%, the financials we have in front of you do show that change. So right now there's a difference between the financials that we're recommending and what you'll see in the package from the library board themselves. Mayor Kraussert?
Right, so in the summary here, it says 934 for 2023. So that's what's being recommended?
That's our number that administration is recommending to have that 5%, and Ms. Cottle is going to speak to this as well.
And I'll just add for context, because we don't do this lightly, but in 2020, when we held the line to taxes at 0%, we cut every town department. We did not touch an affiliate budget. Same in 2021, we gave all affiliates every budget that they asked for. So we're not doing this lightly. We do believe this is fair and equitable. This is also just a plan. The library will need to do the budget for 2023, and they may have surplus in 2022, so it's not an issue. But in doing it, we really felt that it was equitable given our approach to affiliates in 20 and 2021, that this ask was just a bit more incremental than we felt was in line with what we were doing with all other town departments.
Right. So the budget for this coming year is being budgeted at the amount of their ask, and it's just the year after that is, we're saying, based on the others, $50,000 less, and see what we can do with that, and then when we come to this time next year is actually when we know if there's a surplus or not. Right? Okay. Okay.
Correct. So that was just the one item I wanted to flag, because in all other circumstances, what administration has put in the budget is in accordance with the requests that we've received from our partners and affiliates. This was the one situation where we were recommending something different. And again, as you just highlighted, this is for 2023, which would be adoption, not for approval. So we'll be having conversations again this time next year to include 2023. Are there any questions on any of the partners and affiliates or the support packages? Again, there's a significant amount of detail. They are better equipped to speak to their operations and their requests than I am, so I'm going to kind of let the support that they've provided that's included within Section 6 speak for itself. But I did just want to quickly walk through the summary to highlight the significant amounts of money that are included within our budget that flow through to our partners and affiliates.
Great.
So in the absence of any questions there, I'm going to move on to the Tax Stabilization Reserve. So now that we've gone through the operating detail, during the sections on both the RCMP and the fire costs within Dr. Cottle's sections, one of the planned mitigation strategies used to smooth the impacts of these increases is through draws from our Tax Stabilization Reserve. So next I wanted to spend a bit of time walking through kind of an illustrative example of what the next few years of these draws may look like and their impacts.
Do we have any paperwork on this?
I do have, yeah, I printed my presentations and I forgot to give them.
Thank you.
I'd like to state that I loved this one. My eyes could see it. These are hard.
Thank you.
I didn't know if people wanted little note sections, but I will print full screen next time. So there are two, and sorry, I didn't make copies for any of us, but there's both a copy of the presentation I'm just walking through, including that section I just went through, and then the individual page is the example, and I'm actually going to pull up the Excel so we can play with scenarios and look at the charts in real time, if that would be helpful to the Finance Committee. So I'm going to walk through some of the critical assumptions first, and then I can actually open the workbook so we can look at some of those impacts. So the example I'm going to walk through is conservative in that we've assumed no contributions. So as the Finance Committee may recall, contributions to our tax stabilization reserve only come from one-time transfers or one-time unbudgeted sources of revenue. So again, the impacts we're attempting to smooth pertain to the RCMP and fire services. On the RCMP side, you've heard this several times by now, but with that anticipated census result, we are expecting our cost share to go to that 90% from 70%, and then the collective agreement also has those pay increases going forward. Again, we're not looking at the impact of the retro here. We're really just focusing on those impacts we know of going forward. And then additionally, on the fire side, there is that 6-year fire peak staffing phase-in, which Dr. Cottle just walked through. Additionally, I know we haven't gotten to capital discussions yet. That's the week after next. But based on the planned debt that's required to finance the new fire hall, this will result in $470,000 in annual debt servicing payments starting in 2023. So that's a 2% tax increase just from that debt alone. So this illustrative example includes 5% in tax increases in each year before those RCMP and fire impacts. It's just for illustrative purposes. We'll kind of see what actually happens. And then we've assumed $400,000 in taxes in growth from each year. So to the extent that we're using draws from reserves to pay for new ongoing expenditures, we're really just kind of kicking that can further out because at some point, taxes will need to absorb that full cost. So as such, with these draws, we're just really trying to smooth those increases in over time rather than mitigate the full impact. So with that, I'm going to exit my presentation and pull up an Excel workbook because us accountants love Excel. I'm going to try to make this really, really big. That's still not that big, is it? Oh yeah, I'm in, okay. This time of year it induces a bit of panic. Normally it's a helpful tool. Oh, Robin, you always have to remind me how to do that. The carrot. All right. This one? Thank you. Okay, so here's our illustrative example. So I've included 2021 just for reference. Again, obviously the years we most care about right now are these three, the 3-year operating plan that we'll be adopting. And I have also included 25 and 26 because in theory, 2027 would be the year that our plan is to fully absorb the impact of these items with no further draws from the tax stabilization reserve. So from the years now, 2022 to 2027, that's really the period that we're smoothing those increases in over time. So at the top, I have the balance in the tax stabilization reserve. Then we have any contributions. Again, as I say, this example is a bit conservative where I'm not, because they're only one time, we don't plan for contributions to the reserve. I haven't assumed any. And then the draws, for 2021, we had some of those COVID impacts, but then in future years, it really does relate to the RCMP and fire pieces that we're speaking to. So then here I've captured these incremental costs that we're smoothing. So the RCMP, as we've spoken to so far, is $615,000 in 2022. And again, because they're fiscal year doesn't quite line up with ours. That's kind of 3/4 of the impact, so some of that carries into 2023. And then additionally, we also know that the increases per that collective agreement are coming, so that's why we have increases over kind of the next 3 years. Then we have the fire rescue additional staffing. I didn't go through the 6-year plan again since Dr. Cottle had just gone through that, but these are the dollar value impacts of that for the coming years, 92, 290, 114. Again, it's not necessarily even each year depending on the phase of that phase in that we're at. And then additionally, the fire hall debt. So construction, again, we'll talk to this more when we get to capital. But with an approved capital project in 2022, construction would happen kind of over 22, 23. We're anticipating that the debt repayments will start in 2023. And then that's a new debt servicing cost over the term of that debt, so 25 years. So these are then the additional incremental impacts to our budget just from those 2 items. So again, what we're looking at would be for 2022, if we weren't to take any draws from tax stabilization, that was like a 2.5% tax increase. In 2023, we'd be looking at a 3.4% increase. So in the context of our tax increases overall, a significant portion of the room that we might be looking at would be absorbed just by these 2 items. So instead, rather than have a significant one-time jump, we're proposing these draws. So these are what is included in the package so far. So 600,000 related to actually smoothing these 2 draws. Sorry, I also have another 50,000 in there that's related to the Safe Park draw as well. So that is a draw we're doing. It's not directly related to this, but that's why that's not exactly the 600,000 we've been showing. And then 765,000 in 2023 and 240,000 in 2024. We also have illustrative draws outside that 3-year window of a further 200,000 and 100,000. And really what we're trying to do over time is bring in more and more of that draw into our budget, basically. So if we were to, I'm just trying to think of the best way to show this. But these are basically the increases that we would have had if we didn't do the draws. Because we're doing the draws, rather than a 2.5% increase attributed to these 2 items, we're absorbing 0.2. We're only accounting for 0.2 of it in our budget, 0.8% the following year, 1.4 of that 2.1 the following year, 1.9%. And then it starts to go down kind of after that time. So when we look at our reserve balance then, sorry, and these are really tiny, but basically this shows the period from 2016 of us building up our tax stabilization reserve. We knew these impacts were coming. As Ms. DeSoto spoke to earlier, we had been intentionally contributing to this reserve, knowing that these impacts were coming. Obviously, COVID also happened, so we intentionally put some of our grant money into this reserve in order to mitigate the impacts, and then we can see how we're drawing that back down over the period now through 2026. These 2 bands represent, per our reserve policy, there is a target balance and a minimum balance for each of our reserves, including the tax stabilization reserve, that's based on a percentage of our expenses. So in theory, we should be existing somewhere within these bands. Again, we weren't expecting COVID to happen when we were planning for this, so that's why we see this big spike well beyond what our normal target would be, because we knew that the magnitude of the potential impacts to us. And then we can see by the end of this time horizon, we're getting back within the band, and not only that, back towards kind of the minimum balance in that reserve that we would recommend. But again, this is all kind of fully flexible, so if we didn't take future draws in future years, we can see that then we'd be absorbing the full increases of that. It helps our tax stabilization, but it hurts our tax increases overall. So these are kind of some of the scenarios that administration has been looking at when we've been looking at strategies for how we deal with some of these significant increases and how we phase those in over time. Ms. DeSoto? I'm going to put those back.
So I'm trying to understand, if you could just scroll back so we can see the bottom couple of lines.
Sure.
So the third line up from the bottom is planned illustrative increase net of growth. That's overall, right? So you've just removed some of those numbers, or I don't know if you put them back in.
I put them back in.
You put them
just
back
so I wouldn't
in.
lose track
Okay.
of what I've done here.
So what we're looking at, though, is even with this level of support from the Tax Stabilization Reserve in 2025, we're looking at a 7% increase based on sort of a projected budget out to that time frame.
So that's where it's really difficult to project kind of outside our 3-year plan in particular. So the really critical assumption I made here was that we'd kind of historically been at around this 5% tax increase before significant impacts like this. So where the 7% is kind of coming from is a baseline 5%. We would, if we weren't doing any draws from tax stabilization, we would have had another 2.5%. So that would be the 5% that I assumed plus 2.5% just from those two items. But because we're drawing from the tax stabilization, we're getting it down to 1.9, so say 2%. So that 5% plus 2 instead of 2.5 is the 7. So these aren't necessarily illustrative outside those 3-year operating numbers, because I've just assumed a base 5%, and these are just on top of that. So this is in no way meant to indicate that in 2025 we would have a 7% tax increase. It would depend on what that baseline is, but I had to assume some kind of baseline, so I left it at 5%, and I'm really just trying to capture that incremental impact of the 2.5%, which is why I really think these are the best 2 lines to focus on, rather than this one, because it's on top of an assumption.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm throwing a lot of numbers
I have
at
a
you,
question,
which I'm
and
conscious
this is-
of.
This is naive, I know, but whatever. There's no assumption in here about what COLA is. This is just pure base tax dollar amount based on 5%.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not really, okay, yeah.
It's a really simplified way of showing this without overcomplicating it, which is why I just did the blanket 5%. And really the numbers that we kind of know of are these RCMP and fire numbers. And again, what those end up playing 4 years from now, still difficult to say, but this is kind of our planned approach from now until that full phase in, which was kind of the purpose of showing this.
Quick question.
Councillor Fairbrae?
Does this include the additional staff members that the RCMP detachment has requested?
Short answer, for the 3 years it does. Outside of that, I don't believe it does. We've been working with our contacts at the RCMP, so this is based on the best numbers that they could give us. There's also been, and I'm not the expert in this, but I believe that there were some challenges with staffing and bringing staff here. So there are often delays from when in their multi-year financial plan they had intended for positions to come on. So sometimes the numbers we were working with them, they were slightly delayed from the plan document. But for the 3-year window, it includes the best estimates that they would give us, which included those positions. But you can see I didn't put in any RCMP numbers outside of that 3-year window. I'd have to look back at their plan to refresh my memory if there were ones outside of there as well. I believe there might have been. Any further questions on those 3 items? Generally, the tax stabilization reserve. Councillor Husted?
And so this also, just to reiterate, does not include any back pay that was negotiated. Just so anyone watching, like, this is the best case scenario.
Correct. So earlier, Councillor Graham, I believe you brought up about what happens if we end up needing to pay for all these, pay for the retro portion. And again, we've been kind of waiting for that advocacy to play out. We haven't received any invoices yet. So further work, I think, would need to be done to determine the best way to do that. How much of that hits us this year and what options we have. So the tax stabilization, we do still have a healthy reserve in that, whether that's the right place for it to go. We do also have other operating reserves we could look to, or to the extent that we may be sitting in a surplus position this year, we may be able to absorb some of it within our operating budget without necessarily needing to look to our reserves unless we intentionally choose to.
I think a key point that comes out of this is that it is about only using that reserve for a transitional item. It's not about funding anything long-term. And when we see the numbers at the bottom, all that I can think of is getting back to Mr. Soto's story about a story over 10 years and what happens, because when we look at our overall budget, it's the amount that we have to put in reserves and to try to keep up with things that cause that number at the bottom to be higher, the 5% or whatever else could happen, be higher than any of us would really like. I know that it is, but it's what's behind that is not really a growth in change of program, except what's forced upon us, and trying to keep up with replacing assets and infrastructure as it becomes due.
So the one number we haven't really spoken to yet is this debt servicing, and I do appreciate that. So the week after this, when we get into the capital, obviously this will be a big point for the discussion at that time is the construction costs of the new fire hall and the financing options that are available to us and the funding related to it. So to the extent that this debt servicing is directly related to the amount of debt we ultimately take, that'll form part of the discussion in 2 weeks. So this is coming a little bit in advance of that, but again, because it really relates to our tax increases and the operating, that was why we chose to include it at this time.
So that, and the number that it comes down to, I was glad that you showed the parameters for our policy, because when I saw that number dipping down there, I was getting kind of nervous, but we're still within, we don't want it to go much lower, that's for sure, because we won't be able to absorb things as they come along.
Like COVID, which obviously wasn't planned when we'd been making some of these contributions, but we ultimately did need to use it for. And again, this assumes no further contributions to this reserve, so that's why we only see it going down as well. So again, in the next 5 years, again, should those surpluses or one-time unbudgeted revenues come about, again, we could strategically choose to put some of that money in there, but that isn't planned for anywhere, so we haven't assumed that.
Because there may be other things that we've already talked about, retroactive pay, legal bills, or something else, right? Okay.
And I just wanted to add that I think it was around 2016 that we instituted the tax stabilization reserve. So prior to that, we didn't have such a reserve, but we have an operating reserve, which essentially would have been used for the same thing. Had COVID happened when we didn't have a tax stabilization reserve, we would have used our operating reserve.
I think it went back a little bit further, because I know it was always there when I was on council, but you're right, it was a really new thing then.
Really new thing. And it was specifically to address these specific items. Yeah. And there was something else I was going to say. On the debt side, so during the break, we were talking about options related to the old fire hall. And, you know, some of what the past council was thinking about was selling off the property, the old fire hall property, as a mechanism to reduce the overall debt needed to be taken for the fire hall. Because you can see that there are downstream impacts of taking that debt that stick around for 25 years. So as Ms. Smithers was discussing earlier, we will be looking at in 2022 at all of the options related to that fire hall, including selling it, repurposing it for our own purposes, repurposing it for other purposes, and just, you know, there's a lot of balancing in all of that, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
2008.
It was there when I was alive.
Time flies.
And I remember that the target was $1 million. I remember that the target at that time was $1 million.
And we'd have to go back and look at what was instituted for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do actually have a bunch of the history in here somewhere, but.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that concludes what we were hoping to get through today. We do have tomorrow morning at 8:30 to pick up with a last few remaining items.
So what is there planned content to go over tomorrow morning?
I do have, so for tomorrow, we have something called the master fee schedule. I was going to provide that for us to walk through. Again, it indirectly pertains to the operating. There isn't really a natural spot that it fits, but it was a good time to introduce it in to the extent that the fees that are captured in our master fee schedule inform the revenue numbers that were in the operating we've been walking through, again, at a very macro level. So we had that on the agenda for tomorrow. I can provide that. And then debt statistics and reserve statistics imbalances was the only other kind of scheduled item as the last bit of operating we were going through. It's kind of that bridge between operating and capital. So obviously the money flowing to our reserves is from our operating, and then it's drawn out to fund the capital, which then we'll be getting into in 2 weeks' time. So that was going to be the kind of bridge. I'm guessing that won't take the whole time for tomorrow morning, so there is likely probably at least half the morning available for discussion or follow-up of anything that we've talked about today.
Okay, and any motions that council wanted to make to get further information and see if it had the will of council behind it? Okay, or the finance committee, sorry. So I'm looking to CAO, co-chair. Should we, call it a day or?
I think so, unless there's any areas that members would like to delve into a little bit further. We did, because there's a lot of detail in the affiliate section, but the affiliates aren't here, we did pass over that quite quickly. One of the things, I'm not sure if you've all had an opportunity to review those documents in there, but if you would like us to arrange for any presentations from any of the affiliates, it would be good to know that tomorrow. They obviously wouldn't be able to present tomorrow, but so that we could arrange that for the next time we're back together. So that's one of the areas you might want to give some thought to.
Okay. So what I would encourage council to do is give some thought tonight and come prepared tomorrow morning this is the first opportunity to start influencing the budget or getting information that you need to decide about things around the budget, and come prepared. If you want to move something forward, it's not just a matter of, well, how about we do this? Come prepared with a motion, that we request administration to find out about the bears or whatever it is. And what we'll do is when it comes to that time, we'll just open it up, and whoever's got a motion will just try to be equitable about it, and hopefully get through what people were thinking in the time we have tomorrow. And it certainly won't be the last time, but it's a good opportunity because of the break if there's some information that's needed. So this isn't really about hacking and slashing or adding or anything to the budget necessarily at this point, but if there's some things that you would like to explore, let's be ready for that. Does that sound good? All right? Sounds good. All right, so I move that we adjourn at 3:35. All those in favor?